Thanks for joining. A few basic things about the webinar is when we're in the webinar itself, the regular Zoom chat that you're used to is not available. If you have questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A section. I'll be monitoring the webinar, and if you have any questions pop in there, I'll make sure that Damien and John, who are presenters, are going to be able to go through and present that and answer any of those questions you may have as we go through it. So, with that in mind, just realize there's no actual voice or chat available during the webinar. And you can only post questions to the Q&A. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll hang out for a little bit so we can have some open discussions. What we can do at the end is open up the mics so you guys can ask questions of our expert panelists here. So with us today, we have Damien Bruley. He's a longtime Horizon expert. You want to go to that first slide there, Damien? Where's the one about you? Oh, there's the about us first, sorry. So 27 Virtual about us. So just a quick word about 27 Virtual. We're a company that provides professional services for VMware products. One of the things that we specialize in is Horizon. We started back in 2016. We're based in Florida. We do cover the whole US. We also have a really good relationship with VMware. We do all sorts of really cool stuff. We do HCI, VCF, vSphere, vSAN. NSX is something we're known for as well. HCX migrations, Avi, vRealize Suite, and of course, Horizon. So this is something that we take a lot of pride in, and we're very happy to share this information with you. We're also a complete solution seller. That means we provide not only the services, but also licensing. And we can support things like Horizon on-prem, multi-data center, single data center, multi-region, also solutions like Horizon Azure solutions. We support all these different solutions, right? And also with us today is John from ControlUp. He's going to be talking about ControlUp and the features that ControlUp brings to helping customers maximize their value with the Horizon product. And Damien, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Damien. Work with Bill, as he said, mostly around Horizon. So everything about the VDI side and all project related to automation as well. So everything about the vRealize Suite, pretty much as well, my bread and butter. So I'm going to be here today to discuss about a couple of things in order to deploy Horizon 8 in a multi-site environment for a customer that has many sites, many regions, and want to deploy VDI in there. I'm going to be here to explain what would be the requirements in order to achieve that goal, and also what solution needs to be used, or in my opinion, because this is basically my slide deck, the solution we try to use in order to fulfill that need. So there's a couple of things. The first thing is going back to Horizon 8. Let me explain how to successfully deploy Horizon 8. The second one is how to assess the environment in order to deploy VDI in multi-region, multi-sites. The third section is about the solution we usually use. So AppVolume, FSLogix, VMware DEM, VMware Workspace ONE as well. And one of the main components that we're going to have to discuss as well is about load balancing, even global load balancing, since we have many regions, and what VMware brings with the VMware Universal Broker. I think this is a fundamental piece in order to deploy a multi-site Horizon architecture, including what we could say hybrid. So it could be just full on-prem, it could be on-prem and on cloud, on public cloud as well. So yeah, and then we're going to have ControlUp explaining about how to monitor those as well. So anyway, yeah, so my name is Damien. I've been doing and working on the VDI side for pretty much 20 years now, that I'm thinking, since the beginning of VDI. That's crazy. So, and some of the challenge we had back in the days are still kind of the same, because most of the challenge we have now is more related to the desktop rather than anything else. So anything we had in the past related to storage, to network, those kind of things are not pretty much handled. The only thing now, and that's what I'm going to try to focus here today, is about the VDI itself, the desktop itself, and how to make sure we have the right tools to be able to deploy VDI, not only just on a single side, but also since everybody's trying to grow, and with the COVID, we have a lot of different customers that has more needs to have different sites to be able to connect, because there's so many people now using VDI. They need DR, they need active, design. So that's what I'm going to cover today. So before talking about the technologies, I wanted to go back to the fundamental about VDI. And one of the main things, every time we have a new customer and is trying to do a VDI project, the main thing we try to do is to get them to a non-persistent desktop, because in our opinion, that's the best way to be able to achieve and to expand and to scale the VDI infrastructure. So one of the main thing about VDI is there's a gap between what is a persistent desktop, which is, as you can see, it's not even virtual at this point. It's just a desktop. So it's just a machine that is persistent. That's what everyone use pretty much with their own laptop or desktops. So there's a difference between persistent and non-persistent. And the reason we try to go to a non-persistent environment is to get rid of those challenges on the left, which is very complicated to manage, hard to control, how to replicate, to back up between data centers. So those kind of things, we don't really fix them right away. We go through first the work of designing a non-persistent desktop, which will bring them a lot of new features, like it's going to be much easier to deploy VDI because we need to scale again. People connect and log off, log back in, we need to deploy it. And when we provision a VM or an application, that needs to be right away nowadays. So that's one of the main key element for non-persistent, is to be able to deploy VDI much faster. It's going to be more secure as well because it's non-persistent. So it's like a floating pool. You log off, log back in, you have a fresh new VDI. So that's going to be much easier to manage and more secure. And also it's going to be cloud ready. So what I'm saying since the beginning, the goal is to get not just an on-prem deployment, but also the possibility to get to the cloud without changing too many things about the desktops. And for sure, like active scenarios, we have so many customers that has DR sites that are not made for VDI, but after explaining and designing an horizon with the cloud pod architectures and things like that, they can realize that what they have in DR can actually be used as an active configuration, right? Since we have been able to fix that non-persistent desktop. So that's the main thing, and everything that I'm going to cover, I'm trying to get back to that idea of getting that non-persistent desktop, because if you have a persistent VDI configuration right now, it's going to be very challenging to replicate that from on-prem to cloud, or if you plan to expand, or even if you want to deploy a new VDI to a user, it could take an hour or two just to deploy a new persistent desktop, because everything's going to be saved on the same VM. So it's going to be very, very challenging to replicate that. So the goal, every time that we have a project, the goal is try to keep to non-persistent as soon as we can. And the challenges as well with that is it has to be transparent for the user. The user has to feel like it's a persistent machine, like his own laptop. When he connects, you have the same application setting. It doesn't have to redo, the Outlook settings or do it again, signing application, or if there's an application the user has installed by himself, we need to make sure those kind of things are going to be covered and going to be saved and going to be pushed back when the user log back in. So for the admin IT team, it's going to be a non-persistent desktop, and that's the way we're going to work through that. And for the user, it has to be some sort of persistent desktop. The look and feel has to be persistent. So that's what I'm going to try to explain here. And And that being said, so what they call now is a next generation desktop as a service architecture. I think that's pretty much the real naming here. It's a desktop as a service, meaning that the desktop could be on one side, could be on another side, could be on the second region, this kind of thing. It's as a service. So we've talked about that a lot since pretty much maybe the last 10 years. It's getting more ready to go now with, as Bill said, Horizon on Azure, Horizon on AWS, and things like that. So there's many cloud that you can use, and you can replicate what you have on-prem to the cloud and have the same seamless experience for the user. So that's pretty much the new name of it. So now let's talk about Horizon 8 and see what needs to be done in order to answer that need. So Horizon 8, and maybe before going through Horizon 8 or Horizon at all, let's talk about the VDI anatomy, or maybe just the desktop anatomy. So, because we need to remember what a desktop is, that's probably the main thing here. So a desktop and a VDI is pretty much the same. So a VDI is just a desktop that is hosted on a host system, like right now that's going to be about vSphere because it's Horizon, or it could be Azure as well, right? If you go to the cloud. So you need a host system for sure, and that's the infrastructure underneath. So that infrastructure, and that's where Horizon is going to bring, that instant load, non-persistent floating pool. That's the main technology that will allow us to able to scale very, very fast, and also having a non-persistent environment. So that's the infrastructure underneath, because what you see right there, the instant clone, I have a couple of slides about it, but it's still very important to remember this is not an Horizon feature. It's based on vSphere VM4, I think that was in vSphere 6. So it's just the API of vSphere Horizon use in order to deploy and using instant clone. So that's the basic about the VDI. Then you have to work with the guest OS, so a base OS or a gold image if you want, or a master image, as someone said. So this is, in our opinion, it should be as small as it could. We try to have the minimum OS size or minimum OS configuration in there, so that it's going to be much easier to replicate between the different sites or even in between regions, right? So it's trying to keep it simple with the Windows. We have some requirements like, Windows OS has to be framework, maybe some drivers as well, if it needs to be part of the gold image. What else do we have? We could have some agents, depending if it's an antivirus, for example, it could be installed, or it could be agentless if you have McAfee Move, for example, or Trend does that as well. But it's basically the bare minimum that needs to be run, like Horizon agents, DEM agents, Microsoft agents in there, and we'll go through that. The next step and the next layer, I would say, is the user profile. User profile is still a big deal, still complicated to manage for sure. But we do have now some very, very great tools for us to play with. So, and I'm going to try to focus on VMware DEM, Dynamic Environment Manager from VMware, and Microsoft FSLogix, which in my opinion are really two great tools to use, especially for Horizon deployment. So, yep.
On those polling questions there, we got some results there. So we have everybody's got Horizon 7, it looks like, in this group. So we got a lot of Horizon 7 people, and we have people running both remote applications and remote desktops. Like most people are doing both. We have a couple of folks doing just remote applications and some doing just remote desktops. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. So a lot of Horizon 7 stuff still.
Yeah, so and that's great, because everything that I'm talking right now, I know it could be confusing because we say VDI, but yeah, even if it's VDI or if it's a remote app, to me it's going to be the same, and it's going to be the same challenge anyway in the back, because it's still an OS, still having to manage user profile. Same thing about managing apps. even though it could be, just publish apps. Nowadays, even if we do RDSH or Horizon apps pool, we try to use the same tool as in the VDI side. So we're going to talk about VMware App Volumes, which is like a container solution. And that could be used either way for remote app or remote desktop. So to me, it's going to be exactly the same, at least the same challenges. And if you want to have them designed for multi-site, multi-regions, that's going to be the same configuration to me. So, and it could be the same thing with Citrix. I started it with Citrix as well back in the day. So, and the challenges are still pretty much the same. So yeah, and in the pictures, as you can see, there's application containers. That's going to be very helpful, and I think it's even a requirements if we want to go through a cloud pod or a multi-site deployment.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
Steven mentioned he's got Horizon 7 and Horizon Cloud on Microsoft Azure as well.
Okay, great. Very good. So this is pretty much everything about Horizon 8. There are a couple of things about 2020 or 2203 that came up a month ago now. Those things were more related to video optimization, because nowadays one of the most challenges with VDI is to try to get, everything about communication, so Teams, WebEx, Zoom, those kind of solutions needs to be also supported in Horizon. And there's many things I could discuss that as well. I don't want to go up to too many nitty-gritty details about it, but basically there's a lot of new enhancements with Horizon 8 through, for Teams, WebEx, and Zoom, which relies a lot in the Horizon client as well. So always make sure you have the same version, at least up to date, because everything's going to be uploaded to the client. So you have to get the latest version of the client as well to get that done. And on Horizon 8, I think that was 8.4, they introduced also some dedicated channels for Teams, and I think Zoom as well, since it's used that Zoom plugin on the client side. So there's a lot of features for audio for sure in there. A couple of things that we're going to discuss is about instant clone, for sure changed a lot with Horizon 8, and things like ControlUp. That's why we bring them in here, and we try to involve a monitoring solution, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit further. Let's try to integrate a monitoring solution as soon as we can. That's in my experience, we need to introduce that even before, monitoring the desktop itself, the traditional desktop, and see how it is configured, because my experience is like, I've seen a lot of customer actually doesn't really know about what they had in the desktop, because as soon as the desktop is deployed, it's much more complicated to manage, and it's a persistent desktop. So people sometimes can install their own software, they can request some software, they can have some dedicated policy and stuff like that. So having a monitoring solution even before deploying Horizon to me, it's always a good option. And there's a lot of new ISV introduces with Horizon, like we discussed about Avi, I think last year, but there's definitely new things coming up with Carbon Black and things like that. And I wanted to discuss also about the API, because to me that's one of the main feature that we're going to use and we're going to leverage if we want to deploy Horizon to a multi-site and multi-region deployment. We have to use the API, because right now in Horizon, there's no really a solution to replicate those gold images from one site to another, to automate the pool to be resynced, to publish the new VDI from the new snapshot that was done on the first site, for example. So we created some scripts. We have some scripts available that use vSphere API and Horizon API as well to do those kind of things, to make sure that the gold image that we use on one side, the main site, I would say, will be replicated to all the remote sites, including cloud if needed. And we need the API to be able to discuss with Horizon and publish and update the pool as we go. So yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. All right, now let me, and probably you guys already know about it, just wanted to get back to the instant clone, because that's pretty much the first layer that we need to work on when we deploy Horizon, is to make sure, again, we try to, the goal is still to do a non-persistent and very fast deployment of VDI. So one of the main goal is to use that instant clone, which is, again, it's not really a Horizon feature. It's more like a vSphere that came with VM4 back in the days of vSphere 6, I think it was a couple of, maybe 4 years ago now. So we have a base image, and then we have like a replicate, we have templates, and we have the clones. So we have the VDI clones. And one of the things to remember is that it's going to be using a delta disk between the replicate, and it's also sharing the memory with the parent VM. So that's the only way that it's very fast to deploy. And I've been, even working with some other solution in the past, like Citrix Ardence. Well, that was Ardence, and then Citrix acquired for PVS provisionings, like OS streamings and things like that. So it's not really the same thing as an OS streaming, and it's a little bit more optimized than what we've done with Ardence in the past. It was 10 years ago. It's really sharing the same memory as the VM. So that's where you're going to have to remember that it's not, that's why it's so fast to deploy the VDI, because it's actually shared on the base, on the parent VM. So, and to explain that a little bit further, this is how it looks like, right? We have a gold image, we have a template, we have a replicate. So the replicate is basically about the disk, and the memory is about, the parent VM that is connected to the clones VM. So this is why it's very, very fast to deploy and very fast to update as well. The only thing you need to do when you update, go back to the golden image, apply your change, take a snapshot, publish the snapshot in Horizon, and the only thing it's going to do is going to resync the template. That's pretty much it. So that's why it's very fast. So the only thing we need to do now, when we have a multi-region configuration, is to make sure the gold image is replicated. And as I said, we need that to be available in each different Horizon pod. Usually we do that with a task sequence that runs pretty much every day, every night. It's replicate the gold image. I think usually I have the API for the cross vMotion API that I use for vSphere, that allows me to replicate that VM from one side to another. Even if it's on the cloud, on AWS, for example, it's going to work fine. And in that script, as soon as that's done, it's going to create a snap and send API to Horizon in order to update that new pool. So that's how we make sure we maintain the same version between all the different pods, right? So yeah, that's what it was about Horizon 8. So there's a lot of things coming on. I think pretty much all the new features are about the protocol. The blast protocol has involved a lot. It uses less CPU than before. Again, one of the goals, and if possible, and if you have like high-end users, I also try to recommend having some vGPUs. I know it's expensive, but it's really valuable. We've seen a lot of CPU application or CPU intensive application that could be offloaded to the vGPU. So, so since our goal now is to try to have a lot of VDI and a lot of contention and a lot of, everything's going to be shared, we need to make sure that the CPU is not the bottleneck. So that's why having vGPU in a VDI, it could be valuable as well. Everything, even Outlook, if you look at Outlook, and probably you know that as well, there's some feature in Outlook that, offload all the CPU to the vGPU instead. So that's much more important. So I see some polling question as well about multi-sites.
It looks like most of the folks here are multi-site. So we got a lot of people looking at multi-site.
Okay, well, that's great. So yeah, and that's what we have. I mean, nowadays, pretty much all the customer we have try to get multi-site as well. And it can be just a second site with just a vSphere deployment as well. It could be an old DR that is now considered as an active site. So yeah, so now let me talk about how to assess, because this is more about management of VDIs. So this is again, this is from my experience with the many years I've done VDI. I think the first thing is to look at the physical desktop. To me, it's very important to go back to the physical desktop, even going to anything about virtual. Let's go back to the desktop and let's assess what's the applications, user profiles, how it's managed now, what needs to be saved, because most of the time when we start doing VDI, the first question came up. So what application needs to be captured, configured through app volume if it's needed? What application needs to be done like a publish app? How do we deploy those published apps? And what settings needs to be saved on those apps? We've seen a lot of complicated applications. I've worked with Kronos, I've worked with AutoCAD, Katia, many very complicated application where the user can trick, a lot of settings everywhere, even licensing, license key that needs to be saved, pushbacks, things like that. So before going into VDI, let's talk about the desktop, go back to the application. And also every time I start a VDI project, try to involve as many people as I can, including desktop guys as well, even support, because those guys at the support already know what they can, fix or what we could improve with VDI. So try to invite, desktop people. I mean, one of the challenges with VDI is connect everything, right? It needs, network team, it needs the security teams, it needs, infrastructure, needs desktop team, need application manager, because if you deal with large customers, they have some dedicated application manager teams that needs to be involved. And then you have to deal with cloud. As we said, it's a multi-cloud, so you have to discuss with design and people to help on designing and connecting on-prem with the cloud, things like that. So that's the big deal with the desktop is maybe try to focus on the desktop first, because probably the other things about VDI, as I said before, nowadays we do have solution about it regarding the storage, IOPS, things like that, network. It shouldn't be a big deal now. The main thing is still about the desktop, in my opinion. So that's why it's very important first to have an adoption roadmap that includes use cases, and maybe they try to keep it simple and have like just a single use case, and make sure that use case is really really created and designed and identified, right? And if we deal with many different sites, RTO is going to be very, very important as well to understand, because that's going to be pretty much one of the requirements with the different sites and how do we architect those together. And then we need to obviously build an onboarding mechanism or scenarios for the user groups. So implementing maybe Horizon, usually we do greenfields. Even if you do have Horizon 7, we don't do any upgrade, don't recommend any upgrade. I do a greenfield deployment with Horizon 8 because there's so many new technologies involved that it's better to get started with greenfield and have like a dedicated user group, do some initial app testing, desktop testings, and go from there. All right, so let's talk about the applications that are needed now in the VDI side in order to fulfill that need that is getting the design for a multi-site or multi-region configuration. So one of the first things is to go back to the traditional desktop and split the desktop as I did before. Let's try to be a little bit more specific. This is a great picture coming from VMware. And they did an amazing job with that, trying to explain, how to manage all those components using different solutions. right? So I use the same slide. I like this picture. It's very interesting. So you get started with the guest OS. We discussed that many times. Try to keep it simple. Second layer, application. Let's try to keep it simple using app volumes, especially the new version as really involved. I don't know if you guys used that before, but the old version was a little bit slow when it mounts the apps to the VDI. And you can have some logon delay after maybe 20 apps being mounted. Nowadays, with the new version of App Volume, it doesn't work that way, so it's much better. There's even an on-demand features in the, I think it's 4.5 version that came up. So App Volume is really great and very valuable, and it's pretty much a solution to use if you plan to have non-persistent desktop anyway, because it's the App Volume is just a tool that's going to bring read-only apps that will be mounted as you go. So it's very valuable. And then the main challenge then after the fact, after the apps, and it's the layer about, you know, everything about the user. So user environment, predefined settings, user configuration data, those kind of things can be done in too many ways. Could be used just with DEM, or you could use DEM and FSLogix, or you could just use, well, no, usually we try to use DEM anyway, because FSLogix I will show you, but it's not really made for predefined settings and user environments. As you see, it's more about the data and the configuration. And you know, the cache, everything that is cache nowadays. So, and we need to take care of the cache. So FSLogix is great for that. So now, regarding managed applications, as I said, I don't want to spend too much time on that because it could be, we could spend a week on that. But basically, App Volumes brings read-only VMDK, which is apps. We try to split them depending on the user groups. So you could have an app stack with, you know, Office and PDF, another one with just the Chrome, and you can attach them depending on the entitlement the user regarding AD group, for example. So it's very, very simple. And also, App Volumes brings, you know, the writable volumes, which honestly, I try to avoid using it because it's a little bit complicated to manage and to replicate. There's no replication out of the box with App Volume for that. So I try to, unless it's just a one-site deployment, writable volume could be a good option. If you plan to have multi-site, I don't really recommend it. But the writable volume is great for people that needs to install their own apps. And you don't want to capture them, you know, like they have their own apps that needs to be installed. They have admin rights. I don't know, you have a dev environment. So those guys needs to be admin of their own VDI. That could be a good use case. But it's basically, you know, trying to capture, that's going to be a VMDK as well, but a writable VMDK. That's what they call the writable volume. So how does that work? So it's basically very simple for App Volumes. You connect and people will receive their apps depending on what they're entitled to. So it could be, you know, an app for the core, sales, admin, right? They connect to non-persistent VDI. So it's a pool of VM they can connect, but everything is linked to the user, not the VM. So if the user log into VDI 1, the sales app is going to be attached. So it's just a VMDK attachment to the VM. If they log off, the VMDK is detached and someone else can use the VM. You know, and that's the same for the writable. Although the writable, it's a one-to-one because it's a writable VMDK, so you cannot mount that VMDK to multiple VM. The app stack or the applications are read-only, so you can do a end-to-end, many-to-many if you want, any-to-any. The writable volume or FSLogix are a one-to-one though. It's going to capture everything about the user, so it has to be one-to-one. So writable volumes is just a VMDK that is mountable, you know, by API, vSphere API. Calls from App Volume Manager. Microsoft FSLogix is a little bit different because it's going to be in the guest OS. So it's the guest OS that's going to mount, and it's obviously not a VMDK. It's going to be a VHD file, VHDX. So, but that's the main goal here is to try to add the application on one side and the profile on the other side. So Yeah, I don't want to go up to too much detail about app volume. It is very simple. Just app volume manager, load balancer in front, and app volume manager is going to discuss, with SQL, domain controllers, vCenter, and that's it. And another bit about DEM. I think DEM, I like DEM, honestly. I've been using that for so many years. It's great. It has some limitation as well, but for things like setting up the user environment, I think it's really great. And I believe that's usually the tool to use to do that. So everything about what we see here, it's about user settings, personal settings or predefined settings that you need to set. Those things will be done here. Well, actually not this one. So in DEM, you have the personalization, the first tab. So this is, you have to specify, for example, this is an example about Chrome. You need to know exactly what you need to say for Chrome. So the user will execute Chrome, change the layout, things like that, log off, log back in. You want those users to have the same look and feel and not to dismiss everything they've done before. So in DEM, you have to specifically say exactly the files that you need to include or exclude, as you can see here. That's a great example. So that could be also one of the challenges with DEM is that you know how to use your app, right? And for example, nowadays, all the apps are doing a lot of cache. So you need to be careful and make sure you exclude them. And that's going to be very complicated to manage. The second tab, though, this one is more interesting because this is about the user environment. So everything that you set up for the user is going to be done through that tab. So basically, it's like I call it a GPO with much enhancement features. As you can see, there's a lot of conditions you can have. It's really great if you know how to use the tools. There's full of features. There's application blocking, elevation privilege, things like that. So usually when the goal is to have like a multi-site deployment, I try to have both solutions together because I think they fit very well together, DEM and Microsoft FSLogix. DEM, that's why I put a mark on the first tab. I try to avoid using the first tab and let that managed by FSLogix because it's a Microsoft product. And Microsoft is probably the best, even though it's an acquisition back in 2019. But I still believe that they're responsible for whatever needs to be saved on Microsoft OS. So I will say Microsoft FSLogix is great for containing those personalizations, so application settings, cache, things like that, even especially everything about Office, Teams. There's so many cache that it's so easier just to put them all in a single container, which is made by FSLogix. But the rest of it, everything about the user environment should be done by DEM, and DEM has a lot of features, interesting features here to do that. And it knows about Horizon. It's not really integrated with Horizon, but it knows a little bit about, so it's very valuable. All right, let me move on and let's talk about global load balancer and universal broker, because that's one of the main feature, the main thing that we need to have in order to work in a multi-site deployment. So first, let's back up a little bit and make sure, you guys already pretty much know about Horizon, but let me go back a little bit about it. So Horizon pod is a group of resource block, right? Each resource block has a vCenter, vSphere cluster, desktop pools, and there's a lot of different connection servers. That's a pod, right? So a pod is a group of all those components together, and you have the access gateways. You don't have to use them, because if you have a load balancer that does, SSL termination, for example, you could use that instead of a UAG. But usually we try to add the UAG anyway because it's made for it. There's no licensing for it, so it's great. It's very valuable to do it. So we usually have UAG for user that connects from outside. Connection server, well, that's the broker. Everybody knows about it nowadays, so I'm not going to spend too much time about it. And then,
Damien, just real quick, we do have some folks here that do have NSX licensing, so that's good.
Okay, great. Yeah. So yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit then. Yeah. So so I was saying about the pod. So now when you have two pods, and say you deploy the first pod in New York and you want to attach it to a pod in UK, for example, well, this is where the cloud pod architecture is going to take place, right? So it's pretty much the same. You just have a global data layer that's going to be like doing a LDAP replication, but scaled. So that way, when you connect here, you have two pods. For the user, it's going to be the same. So you're going to have a single namespace. Well, unless you really want people from New York to connect to New York and people from London to connect to London. But usually we try to keep it simple and have a single namespace for the full horizon, just a horizon name, right? So then we have to know exactly how people are going to be redirected from one site to another. And that's where the global entitlements came in place. So global entitlements means that, like, for example, you have two pools in New York, one and two pools in London. You can tell one user to access just New York. You can say one user to just access London. Or you have 80 groups that are entitled to both, right? So this is where the global entitlement came in place. And on top of that, there's something called the home sites. And the home sites, to me, is really really interesting, because the home site let you manage and splits the AD and the user between sites as you grow. So you just have to define a home site for a user. If the user is in America, then it makes more sense probably with the latency. And I'm not talking about global load balancer here. I'm just talking about if you know that the user is in America, you can say that his home site is going to be New York. But the home site is not, it's just the preferred path. So if the home site and if New York is not available, it will try to connect to London anyway. That's the failover, basically. So, and I like that idea, so that you have a single pane of glass where you define all the users and where they should be connected to. So yeah, so cloud pod architecture, one slide I like to mention as well is that, why do we do CPA? Is that because cloud pod architecture is a limitation with, you see how it is not supported. You cannot connect two different connection server, one in New York and one in London. It's not supported. So you have to split those into two pods. That's basically it. And yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, usually I like to explain that, but you guys already use Horizon, so you know exactly how it's going to be used and how to connect. So I'm going to bypass that. Although the global load balancer, as we discussed, is interesting, and this one is an AVI example, because there was an NSX advanced load balancer. So and you don't, well, I mean, for the global load balancer, you need AVI. If it's for local load balancer, we've done a lot of projects as well with NSX Basic. Which has some drawbacks as well, like levels, layer 7 monitorings as well. But we've done that through Horizon. It works fine. But if you want to go up to global load balancer, because we need to have, if you have a single namespace, you need a global load balancer to help you redirect the connection as you go, right? So global load balancer is great. There's one drawback about the global load balancer, in my opinion, is that it's not aware of the sites. So there's no way you know exactly what the user should be connected to, right? Even if you use the home sites or things like that, it will try to connect to the site that is available. Even though the home site is in New York, if London is the preferred path, the global load balancer will go back to London. And then London will say that, no, the home site is New York, so the connection will go back to New York. So there could be some issues with the global load balancer as well, because it's not fully integrated with Horizon right now. So one of the solution as well is to look at the VMware Universal Broker. The Universal Brokers, it's like a connection server in the cloud. That's basically what it is. So the first thing I'm going to authenticate to is this box in the cloud. And this box is aware then of all the different Horizon deployment, if it's Azure, if it's on-prem. Right. And when you connect, it knows about the home site. You already defined that in the Universal Broker. So, and the Universal Broker basically replaced the needs to have a global load balancer. I mean, it's better to have a load balancer as well, because, it's just a component in the cloud. So it doesn't manage what you have on-prem. So you still need a load balancer. But at least if you don't have a global load balancer, if you have an NSX and it's basic, that could be a good fit as well.
All right, I think we need to shift it over. I think that's great information. everybody in the webinar, we can definitely post questions here in the chat. I guess it's open, and also in the Q&A. So we only have a few minutes left. I want to make sure that John has a chance to go through some of his stuff. So Damien,
that was actually my last slide. So
okay, great. That's great presentation, Damien. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and just turn it over to John, and he's going to talk about, I guess, something that's pretty important to most folks, which is performance, right? So we got this whole thing set up, John. So how can you give us a quick introduction, talk about your product and how it can help?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name's John Hare. I work with ControlUp, and for those of you not familiar with ControlUp, we provide a solution to not only view your environment, but also optimize it, right? So ControlUp solution, and I'll just kind of give you a little bit of background around this. The solution is for managing your digital employee experience. And what the focus is here is trying to see what your environment looks like from your user's perspective, right? And then giving you tools to not only view what's going on with those user sessions, but also the ability to remediate and take action upon that, right? And this is not only looking at, say, your VDI session, but also trace that all the way back to your endpoint, whether that's a physical endpoint managed by your corporate environment. It could be a thin client, it could be a BYO device, right? And looking at everything from that session that could potentially affect your user. And we break the product down into a few different sections, and I'll do that as well. But basically what we're looking at is what the user sees, right? So everything that the user is consuming, whether that's a physical endpoint, VDI, and then the tools and applications that they're accessing as well. So we want to be able to have the insights into what's going on in the user's environment from their perspective, right? Because it's one thing to be able to see your environment from a data center perspective, right? And look at all the components that make that up. But that doesn't always give you the full picture of how your user is experiencing the environment. So I'll just break this into a few different areas here. So let me get rid of this poll real quick here. We break this product into kind of three main sections, right? The first being real-time troubleshooting and remediation, right? So being able to see real-time what your user is experiencing. And there's a few products within there. Real-time DX is our main console that if anyone's ever seen ControlUp in the past is the main focus of the product, where it's been around for over 10 years. And then we get into remote DX, which allows us to look at BYO, a very light plugin on an end user device. So from a BYO perspective, we can have some insights into what's going on at the endpoint. And then Edge DX is a product that we utilize for physical endpoints, whether that be a physical Windows, Mac, Linux, thin client, right? And part of the real-time message here is giving you the visibility in that EUC environment. The virtual application. So understanding exactly what's going on real time. So it's every 5 seconds we're getting updates of what's going on in that environment. It also helps provide you with guided root cause analysis and assisted and automation remediation. And just to show you very quickly what that looks like, I'm going to show you real quick what that console looks like. So okay, so just giving you an idea of what we can see, right? So everything from the data center picture of the hypervisors down to the hosts and the machines that users are on. So giving you a very good view of your environment. All of this stuff's sortable. So if I wanted to see what machines in my environment have high stress, I can. And then I can drill down into those environments to see exactly what's going on, what users are on those sessions, right? And from there, I have the ability of controlling those machines, modifying session information. And then one of the really very powerful things is being able to take action on those endpoints, right? And there's a lot of embedded actions within the product already. So things like rebooting the machine or killing a process, all the way down to script actions that are built into the product, as well as custom script actions. So a lot of these are custom script actions that we've created that allow you to modify your machine, right? Whether that's something that you have in your environment that's a regular troubleshooting step, all the way through to automation and remediation. So if we see a trigger point on the endpoint, we can take that trigger point and then automatically run a script against it, right? And let me go back to my presentation real quick. So following up on the real-time side of things, the remote DX is giving you the visibility into remote endpoints. And then the Edge DX is really powerful because this gives you the view of the end user session, not only from the VDI standpoint, but also from the end user. So if I bring this back up and show you what the Edge DX looks like for my dashboard, I can see all of the devices in my environment that are connecting into my environment, right? So I'm getting a view from a world perspective of what machines are connecting into my environment. And then I can drill into those devices. All of this stuff is drillable. And then I can even see things like Wi-Fi strength, right? For example, I have a machine here whose Wi-Fi signal doesn't look very good. So I can select that device and it'll tell me everything about that endpoint, right? What Wi-Fi they're connecting to, what the SSID is, what the signal strength is. So if a user is calling in with, say, a session problem and they're not getting a good experience, I can see everything from that endpoint all the way through to their VDI session into the backend infrastructure, so that I can narrow down where the issue is. I've been working in this industry for 25 years and in this virtual world for close to 20. And there's so many times that I find that users are running into experience issues and has nothing to do with, say, the backend infrastructure, right? It's the VDI session's running great, but they have a poor network latency from their home, right? They have bad Wi-Fi. They're connecting on a device that's just not powerful enough to connect into the environment. So a lot of insights into what's going on in the environment. Okay. Beyond that, we look at proactive monitor resources, right? So there's a product called ScoutBees that we have. And what ScoutBees allows you to do is provide proactive synthetic testing and availability testing, right? So we can run transactions against applications and cloud-based SaaS solutions, or even your VDI environments, right? So for example, I can go in and log into an environment and provide a status report of what's going on in that environment. If I wanted to see availability of an environment, I can go up and run a test every, say, 5 minutes to find out if this environment is available, right? Whether that's running a ping or a trace route or a custom action to go in and say, you know, open Excel in 365, run a couple lines of code in there, and then tell me what the result is. And what that looks like is here. So ScoutBees provide you, you can do hives from our cloud. So these hives allow you to run transactions from our hives, or you can do a custom hive from an internal location on your infrastructure and be able to find out what your tests are. So for example, I can go out here and look at my workspace one, and I can see that it's got 100% availability. I've run 24 tests on it. All 24 have succeeded, and it tells me what's going on in that environment. Each one of these tests can be customized. A lot of times it's a lot of availability stuff, but also you can run complex transactions here too to find out how your environment's not only running, but you can also do those from different locations. So if, let's say, you have 30 locations in your environment, I can run a test from each one of those to tell you what the availability and experience is from each one of those. And then you can have a transaction log of what's going on in the environment. And then finally, we have insights, which is historical experience. So you provide you with 12 months by default of data around your environment. So you can find out what happened, say, from a trend standpoint on Mondays through Fridays for login experience, login durations, or if you want to see, what your environment looks like, week over week or month over month, it can provide you with great analysis of what's going on in your environment over time. And I know that speaking of time, we're running low on that. And I apologize for rushing through those things, but just wanted to give you a brief synopsis of what ControlUp is. We partner with 27 Virtual. We work very well with all virtual technologies. VMware is a very large partner of ours that we do a lot of business with. And you'll find a lot of not only just general end user experience information within our product and interactive processes, but also very focused on VMware as well. So everything from your host to your storage down to your VDI and your endpoints, you'll be able to see what's going on in the environment. And then most of those things you can be proactive on, and then also be reactionary and do remediation within those. So appreciate the time. Thanks 27 Virtual for letting us join this seminar. If you're interested in looking at ControlUp or getting a demo or POC, we can definitely get on a call and show you a little bit more in depth with a little bit more time of how the product can help you in your environment.
Yeah, it's great. We use it with a lot of our customers. You know, I think the one thing that's really cool about it is you got a whole bunch of desktops out there, and you just want to be able to say, hey, you know, which ones are starting to hit high utilization, what's going on. I can get alerts and notifications. I can go to that virtual desktop. I can run a script against it to reset a process or shut something down. You know, especially as you kind of get your environment dialed in. You know, we focus as a partner pretty much on the Horizon VDI, but look at the things this tool can do across many different platforms and environments. So it's a great tool. So thanks a lot for your time, John. We really appreciate you joining us today. I want to thank everybody for joining, you know, this webinar. It is that time. So definitely appreciate it. When you leave the webinar, there is a post-webinar survey. If you can take a few minutes and please complete that post-webinar survey, it'd be really great. You guys also did a great job asking those polling questions throughout. It was really interesting to see, you know, all the different results that you have. If you guys have any questions, please post them in the Q&A or in the chat. Be happy to answer those questions as we close out, hang out for a few minutes. And again, thanks, Damien, thanks, John, and great job.
Thank you.